Уважаемые дамы, уважаемые господа, доброе утро. Конечно, я рад присутствовать здесь, и спасибо организаторам за приглашение. Я думаю, это один из очень хороших форматов диалога, и Латвийский институт международных отношений тоже организует другие форматы, но я думаю, что здесь нет, как бы сказать, перебора, и здесь, наверное, можно участвовать в разных форматах диалога. Я приветствую международных коллег и, конечно, хочу подчеркнуть, что я приветствую российских коллег, потому что я думаю, что это очень важно, что российские гости и коллеги приезжают, и мы готовы разговаривать. Здесь я перейду на английский язык, чтобы уже всем было понятно, и это все-таки язык взаимодействия пока еще остается. I will touch upon three basic issues, I mean, the classical ones. Where are we now, whom to blame and what to do? Где мы сейчас, кто виноват и что делать? И где деньги, да. Наверное, о этом тоже мы можем пообщаться. So where are we now? Last year I was participating, of course, in the same conference, and I said it is the lowest point in Western-Russian relations since the end of the Cold War. There are risks of starting a new version of Cold War. That's how I defined it a year ago. And I was mistaken. Namely, that in our region, the pessimist is who believes that we have achieved a rock bottom. The optimist is who believes that it can get worse. So unfortunately, it is a season for this kind of optimism. It is getting worse, and it can get even worse before it gets better. So what are the defining features of this new normal? Sometimes I hear that we call it the Cold War light. It's not really a Cold War, because at least during Cold War times we had a strategic stability and some sort of balance, and it is not anymore light. It is fragmented, it is tense security landscape, and perhaps even more dangerous than during the Cold War years. What are those defining features, at least some of them? Zero trust between us. Let's face it. We have entrapped ourselves in negative rhetorics and images. It is so much difficult then to get out of this mental trap. Pandora box has been opened, and certainly it poisons our relationships. Mutual sanctions. Certainly it influences our economies, and it's not just about influencing our economies, I think it influences our thinking. We reorient ourselves, at least in Russia here, it's not anymore from Lisbon to Vladivostok, it's from Kaliningrad to Shanghai. So there are different kind of perceptions. What are the economic community, what should be developed? And I think it's similar in European Union, at least in the West. The dangerous brinkmanship. We have quite a number of tense and unpleasant moments in the recent few years. Identified and unidentified military objects very close to each other. We have spoken about some identified objects in the Swedish territorial waters. We have spoken about some dangerous brinkmanship next to Copenhagen, and we can of course continue this list. And it was mentioned by previous speakers that there are troops here, but then there are troops next to our borders, and then of course we see Iskander. So it goes and goes and on, and we can speak about security dilemma. Action-reaction leads to further escalation, and nobody wants to look weak in this situation. All of us want to sort of reassure ourselves. And security debate, unfortunately, focuses on like two quite unpleasant alternatives. Are we sleepwalking into the war, and we should, of course, preclude from sleepwalking into the war, or are we too much appeasing, and there should be coercive diplomacy on the table? Sometimes comparisons have been made to 1914 and 1938, unfortunately. For us in the region, as one of my colleagues expressed it, it's the end of post-historical nirvana. We saw that history and geopolitics have ended here, that geopolitics doesn't matter anymore, that great power ambitions are not relevant anymore. Unfortunately for us in the Baltics, the ghosts of the past have been invoked. In 2015, around 30% of Baltic societies, if you would ask what is major concern in security field, what is your top concern, they would say it's a risk of war. Now, thanks God, it has decreased, It is less than 20%, but still emotions are there. So it is time to talk. It's time to discuss, but of course sometimes it's also the question, is it some sort of imitation of the dialogue without impact on strategic choices? So whom to blame? Kto vinavat? The problem is that we so much differ in our explanations of the roots and motives behind each other's actions that it usually goes and boils to the blame game. And I don't want to play this blame game because we can go back beginning of the 90s and we can sort of have a lot of different examples, and of course they are very relevant, but this is pretty much continuous. So the simple answer is, if I would have to reply, we are different. And let's face it, we are different as communities, we are different as societies, we have different organizing principles of societies, we have different projects of modernity. In Europe and in West, trauma of nationalism has led to delegation of sovereignty to supranational institutions. So pretty much we escaped from the state. State was a source of the risks and some tensions as well. Recently, of course, the community of the values and of the like-minded demonstrate some misorientation and challenge. Of course, it's about Brexit. In Russian TV yesterday, I had a comparison, лодка, которая идет к дну. So it is a thinking about. It's not that it's not shared sometimes by some people in the West. As Anne Applebaum has expressed, we are 2 or 3 bad elections away from the end of the West as we have known it so far. But I think let's not over-exaggerate our weaknesses. We are not as weak as it may seem, and fundamentals of this supranational community of the like-minded of the values still remain. In Russia, the trauma of collapse of the Soviet Union has been, I think, one of the motivating factors. So the state actually must be strengthened. The state must be brought back. Conservative and assertive. I think additionally to this, Maidan trauma has been present as well. The changes from outside, imposing changes from outside must be resisted. I think there is a reassessment of the EU's role in Russia's modernization efforts among Russian elites. The EU is not anymore indispensable partner anymore, as it was perhaps for quite many years. So regardless of prospects of those international players, the West, the European Union, and as well Russia on the other side, political legitimacy, how we build or how the political elites build their political legitimacy, are actually based on quite diverging principles and quite diverging fundaments. So we are entering the stage of what we may define as no one's world. There is no anymore global values and global world order. No new world order has been ended after a number of 9/11s or psychological shocks, be it for Russia, be it for the West. The last one, of course, here, at least in this region, was 2014. I would not like to go too much into the neighborhood dimension, and we can discuss it later on, but I think neighborhood is at the crossroads, at the crossfire as well, and region is fragile. And it shows this crossroads of 2 integrationist projects, what was mentioned by the previous speakers as well. So here we see those differences in attitudes, differences in approaches. So what the EU wants, it's a stable and predictable neighborhood, and of course normalized relations with Russia. But under those circumstances, it is difficult to achieve and combine all those goals. We see a certain stalemate. EU's transformative power has been limited, not also being willing to provide EU membership. Capacity of transformation is limited also in the neighborhood, also among societies, but also the ability of Russia to impose control or to be attractive is also limited. So in this, it is quite difficult to find a common language. So what to do? Что делать? Sometimes we speak about building trust, but I think building trust is difficult between 2 quite different actors with divergent modernity projects and divergent regional agendas. The certain optimism is, I guess, that we are concerned about the situation, that we are concerned about state of where we are right now. It means that we are unhappy about it, and it is a good start that something should be done, something should be mended. How to approach? Two approaches, micro level, small steps, but then we may lose strategic frame, or the macro approach, we can have some strategic vision and try to build some wider strategic framework, but I think it is possible right now. So for me, it is about small steps, at least to try to go in different directions and to move forward. What are those small steps? At least few of them, and some of them being mentioned previously, just touched on a couple of additional ones. Henry Kissinger said that Putin's demonization is not a policy, but an alibi for not having one, or perhaps absence of one. But I think the same goes for Russia as well, that it needs demonization of the West. I think it's also not alibi. The shared neighborhood will be the litmus test. When I switch on a Russian TV, at least during the last week or last days, one of the popular themes is end of Motorola. You can see it quite frequently on Russian TV shows. Some would say it's the end of Russian Spring. And I think it's perhaps also the good thing that we can move forward, because Donbass has become a difficult or nuisance or problematic for all sides involved. I think OSCE has been, in a sense, coming back, and perhaps at least it is not a very efficient body and institution, but still at least had some relevance. The Baltic Sea region. The Baltic Sea region is, I think, a good example of a two-track approach with Russia. On the one hand, there is reassurance, on the other hand, there is dialogue. The cooperation and dialogue as much as possible, security and reassurance as much as necessary. Of course, I would disagree that NATO enlargement has been a mistake. I believe it has been very important here in the region because it has created quite clear lines. It has created also psychologically self-confidence and stability of mindsets. And it is important to interact and not sort of have this impression of the weakness and to have an impression of the vulnerability. I think we should feel self-confident first of all, and then we can engage in normal dialogue. So that's why the boots on the ground after Warsaw Summit are also the positive thing development, also for our interaction. At the same time, I would say that conflict prevention measures are important. We are in this risk of reaction, action, cycle, and entrapment. We have seen different saber-rattling from both sides. So that's why more transparency is important. Let's start with transponders being switched on. And of course, the good thing is that this year we see the NATO-Russia Council meeting, and I think this is a good start, at least also to discuss those things and to discuss transparency. More the positive ones, economic interaction. We have seen different challenges, but I think economically still we have a quite close relationship. And I would, of course, invite to look in these win-win projects, and such as 16+1 and transport corridors in the region. So we cannot have the wider transcontinental transport corridors without Russia. So when I think it puts all us next to the table and also to speak, and when we want to involve, for instance, China, which is becoming increasingly important partner for us. And last but not least, people-to-people or unconventional diplomacy is important. We have discussed some years ago the free visa regime. Of course, let's be realistic. There is no free visa regime on the table. What I would advise, let's have at least functioning visa regime at the moment. Because we have the football of non gratis, not being able to come here, not being able to go to Russia. I guess I can just add my private sort of stories that I've been invited to the Valdai Club, but I have not received a visa. So there was no chance to participate in the Valdai Club as well. So at the very end, to conclude, cooperative confrontation, engagement despite mistrust or selective engagement, I think these are the terms which are describing the current situation. Also the building bridges. Even though I was reminded by one of my Russian colleagues that Mr. Brezhnev, when he was advised by the Richard Nixon to build bridges, he asked this question, should we build a bridge across the river or along the river? And of course, I would invite to build a bridge finally also across the river. And in a context of short-term pessimism, but I hope in a long-term patience. Thank you so much.